As was shown in my last video, atheists have no compelling evidence for all the various parallel universe scenarios that they have put forth. In fact, as was also shown in that video, there is fairly strong evidence that can be mustered against their claims for parallel universes. And whereas atheists have no compelling evidence for the various parallel universe scenarios that they have put forth, Christians, on the other hand, can appeal directly to the higher dimensional mathematics behind quantum mechanics, special relativity, and general relativity to support their belief that God upholds this universe in its continual existence, as well as to support their belief in a heavenly dimension and in a hellish dimension. In the following video, the discovery of the higher dimensional nature of the square root of -1, which is integral to quantum mechanics, and the discovery of higher dimensional geometry, which is integral to general relativity, are discussed. The history of the square root of -1 is particularly interesting to look at. Descartes had rejected complex roots and coined the derogatory term imaginary to describe the square root of -1, whereas Gauss, who was the mathematician who finally clearly explained the higher dimensional nature behind the square root of -1, suggested that complex magnitudes be called lateral instead of imaginary magnitudes, since they represent a dimensional extension of the continuum. Gauss also proposed that complex magnitudes be awarded full civil rights. The author further comments, in the language of Plato's allegory of the cave, complex numbers represent forms from a higher dimension, casting shadows on the real number line. And in quantum mechanics, we find that the square root of -1 is necessary for describing the wave pack prior to measurement. What was not mentioned in the preceding video or in the preceding article is that the wave function is also represented as being in an infinite dimensional Hilbert space. Moreover, this infinite dimensional Hilbert space of the wave function takes an infinite amount of information to describe properly. As should be needless to say, the preceding findings are very comforting to overall Christian concerns. Here's a video that goes over the preceding findings and how they relate to Christian presuppositions in a bit more detail. Four-dimensional space was also mentioned in the mathematics of higher dimensionality video that I referenced at the beginning of this video, as was the necessity for four-dimensional space in the formulation of general relativity, also mentioned. But what was not mentioned in the video is that special relativity is itself also based on a single four-dimensional continuum now known as Minkowski space. In fact, the higher dimensional nature of special relativity was a discovery that was made by one of Einstein's math professors in 1908, prior to Einstein's elucidation of general relativity in 1915. Moreover, these four-dimensional spacetimes that undergird both special relativity and general relativity are also comforting to overall current Christian concerns, and that they reveal two very different eternities to us. One eternity is found for a hypothetical observer who is going the speed of light, and another eternity is found for a hypothetical observer falling to the event horizon of a black hole. As was mentioned, the eternity for special relativity is found when a hypothetical observer approaches the speed of light. In this scenario, time as we understand it would come to a complete stop for that hypothetical observer as he reached the speed of light. To grasp the whole concept of time coming to a complete stop at the speed of light a little more easily, imagine moving away from the face of a clock at the speed of light. Would not the hands on the clock stay stationary as you moved away from the face of the clock at the speed of light? Moving away from the face of a clock at the speed of light happens to be the very same thought experiment that gave Einstein his breakthrough insight into special relativity. Here's a short clip from a video that gives us a look into Einstein's breakthrough insight.
Today, E = mc² is Einstein's most famous equation. But another theory he publishes this same year is more important and more controversial: the special theory of relativity. When Einstein was a teenager, he enjoyed imagining what it would be like to ride a beam of light. Now, he returns to this daydream, and it changes his life.
In the spring of 1905, Einstein was riding on a bus, and he looked back at the famous clock tower that dominates Bern, Switzerland. And then he imagined, what happens if that bus were racing near the speed of light?
In his imagination, Einstein looks back at the clock tower, and what he sees is astonishing. As he reaches the speed of light, the hands of the clock appear frozen in time.
Einstein would later write, "A storm broke in my mind. All of a sudden, everything kept gushing forward."
Einstein knows that back at the clock tower, time is passing normally. But on Einstein's light-speed bus, as he reaches the speed of light, the light from the clock can no longer catch up to him. The faster he races through space, the slower he moves through time. This insight sparks the birth of Einstein's special theory of relativity, which says that space and time are deeply connected. In fact, they are one and the same, a flexible fabric called space-time.
That time, as we understand it, comes to a complete stop at the speed of light, and yet light moves from point A to point B in our universe, and thus light is obviously not frozen within time, has some fairly profound implications. In the following audio clip, Michael Strauss, who has a PhD in particle physics, reflects on one of those profound implications.
About something more commonplace, like our ordinary photons.
What about them?
There's so much, yeah. They are, from the point of view of a photon.
Yeah, okay, fine. I know what you get. Photons, because they go at the speed of light, time never passes for them. So, people, again, this comes to the transcendent God. People say, how could God be everywhere at one time? Well, photons everywhere at one time. So if a photon can do it, it's not hard for God to do. The problem is when you understand how limiting 3 dimensions of space and time are, 4 dimensions, and you understand relativity and quantum mechanics, the miracles of God become almost trivial. The
miracle so far.
The miracle so far. Well, they'll all be trivial for him. Yes, sir, in the back.
The only way it is possible for time not to pass for light, and yet for light to move from point A to point B in our universe, is if light is of of a higher dimensional value of time than the temporal time we are currently living in. Otherwise, light would simply be frozen within time to our temporal frame of reference. One way for us to more easily understand this higher dimensional framework for time that light exists in is to visualize what would happen if a hypothetical observer approached the speed of light. In the following video clip, which was made by two Australian university physics professors, we find that the three-dimensional world folds and collapses into a tunnel shape as a hypothetical observer approaches the higher dimension of the speed of light.
Of reduced c-scenes. This means that the speed of light has been slowed down from over 1 billion kilometers per hour to a speed of only 1 meter per second. The consequences of this fiction have been restricted to optical effects, and allows us to see special relativistic effects not possible in everyday life. The first scene is a trip down a highway without any relativistic effects. Note the position and orientation of the structures in the desert. For the next trip, we enable relativistic aberration. As we accelerate, note that the angular compression creates an initial impression of backwards motion. As we pass the sign, it seems to rotate around. This can be viewed as lateral rotation, or as angular aberration, keeping the sign in our field of view as we pass it. The back walls of the building are also visible, and extreme distortion is visible on all the objects. Note particularly the sky, steadily shrinking down to the vanishing point. With full relativistic effects now including the headlight effect, the image quickly turns monotone, with objects near the edge of the screen darkened, and the center brightly illuminated.
To give us a better understanding as to what it would be like to exist in a higher dimension, this following video, Dr. Quantum in Flatland, also gives us a small insight as to what it would be like to exist in a higher dimension. Besides the tunnel curvature to a higher eternal dimension found in special relativity, we also have tunnel curvature to a very different eternal dimension in general relativity. The following video clip is very good for illustrating that tunnel curvature that is found in general relativity.
Ultimately, the thing that gives him that clue turns out to be his old faithful way of reasoning, the thought experiment.
So it's what you and I would call daydreaming, but he gets to call them thought experiments because he's Einstein.
He's in his office at the patent office, looking out at the window, and he imagined a man working on a roof. And he begins to wonder what would happen if one of those men were to fall off the roof.
And then he had the happiest thought of his life, the inspiration of the ages.
He had a vision. The man will not actually be feeling his own weight.
He would be weightless. And then he imagined, if you're in an elevator and somebody cuts the cord, what happens to you? You fall. But the elevator falls at the same rate you do, so you are weightless inside the elevator. So then Einstein got it.
It's as though gravity's been switched off. What's really going on?
There is no such thing as gravitational pull. The Earth has curved the space around me, and space is pushing me into this chair. Space itself can be curved.
That's crazy sounding.
Space is adjustable.
It's actually malleable. Space and time are malleable.
It's this flexible thing.
The following video is also very good for illustrating the tunnel curvature that is found for the space-time of gravity in general relativity. Specifically, it is good for visualizing the tunnel curvature that is found at black holes. What makes the eternity of general relativity profoundly different than the eternity found at special relativity is that entropy, which is the primary reason why our material bodies grow old and eventually die in this universe, is found to be greatest at black holes. As the following article stated, supermassive black holes are the largest contributor to the observable universe's entropy. And in the following quote, Kip Thorne describes what will happen to a hypothetical astronaut as he reaches the singularity of a black hole. He states, Einstein's equation predicts that as the astronaut reaches the singularity of the black hole, the tidal forces grow infinitely strong, and their chaotic oscillations become infinitely rapid. The astronaut dies, and the atoms which his body is made become infinitely and chaotically distorted and mixed. And then, at the moment when everything becomes infinite, the tidal strength, the oscillation frequencies, the distortions, and the mixing, space-time ceases to exist. Thus, the eternity that is found at a black hole can rightly be called an eternity of decay and or destruction. Needless to say, to those of us who are of, shall we say, a spiritually minded persuasion, this finding of an eternity of destruction should be fairly sobering. Of related interest, in his resurrection from the dead, and as witnessed by the Shroud of Turin, Jesus Christ bridged this seemingly infinite gap between these two very different entropies that are associated with special relativity and general relativity, respectively. As well, this following video, in a bit more detail, goes over these two very different entropies associated with general relativity and special relativity. It is also important to note that hypothetically traveling at the speed of light in this universe would be instantaneous travel for the person going at the speed of light. This timeless travel is still not completely instantaneous to our temporal framework of time, and is therefore not completely transcendent to our temporal framework. That is to say, speed of light travel to our temporal frame of reference is still not completely transcendent of our framework, since light appears to take time to travel from point A to point B from our temporal perspective. Yet, in quantum mechanics, instantaneous travel is not only achieved with the speed of light framework, but instantaneous travel is also achieved in our temporal framework. That is to say, the instantaneous travel of quantum information is instantaneous to both our temporal framework and the speed of light framework, not just the speed of light framework. Quantum correlations are not limited by time nor space in any way, shape, or form in any frame of reference, as light is seemingly limited to us in this temporal framework. Quantum correlations are truly instantaneous. Of particular interest to this is that this discrepancy between what Einstein termed the physical time of relativity and what philosophers termed the now of the mind is one of the primary reasons why Einstein never received a Nobel Prize for special relativity. In fact, Einstein went so far as to say that the time of philosophers did not exist. In fact, Einstein also stated to a philosopher that the experience of the now cannot be turned into an object of physical measurement. It can never be a part of physics. Yet, contrary to what Einstein thought was possible for experimental physics, the experience of the now is now found to be very much a part of physical measurement. In fact, although in Einstein's formulation of both special and general relativity, a hypothetical observer is given a privileged frame of reference in which to make measurements in the universe. On the other hand, in quantum mechanics, it is the measurement itself that gives each observer a privileged frame of reference in the universe. As the following researchers stated, it proves that measurement is everything. At the quantum level, reality does not exist if you are not looking at it. The atoms did not travel from A to B. It was only when they were measured at the end of the journey that their wave-like or particle-like behavior was brought into existence. Thus, contrary to what Einstein thought was possible for experimental physics, the experience of the now is now found to be very much a part of physical measurement. Furthermore, many recent experiments in quantum mechanics have now undermined the space-time of Einstein's general relativity as to being the primary frame of reference for reality, and have established, for lack of a better term, the now as the primary frame of reference for reality. As the following researchers stated, we must explain space and time as somehow emerging from fundamentally spaceless and timeless physics. Of related interest to the now of quantum physics finally overturning Einstein's belief that only the physical time of relativity existed, and that the mental time of the now of philosophers did not exist. In the following article, Dr. Bruce Gordon very ably and knowledgeably defends the theistic position of what is termed idealism in quantum physics. Moreover, besides quantum mechanics giving Christians fairly compelling evidence that we do indeed live in a universe that is upheld by God in its continual existence, quantum mechanics also offers us fairly compelling evidence for the Christians' belief that they do indeed have a soul that is capable of living beyond the death of our material body. The following videos touch on that evidence for a soul from what is termed quantum biology. Simply put, and to sum it up, as Stuart Hameroff states in the following video, it's possible that this quantum information can exist outside the body, perhaps indefinitely, as a soul. Moreover, to further validate the Christian claim that heaven and hell are real and actually exist, we don't have to rely solely on our scientific evidence from special relativity and general relativity, but we can also reference the many testimonies of people who have died for a short while and come back. These testimonies are termed near-death experiences. Moreover, although some atheists have fought tooth and nail against the validity of near-death experiences as being real, as Dr. Michael Egnor points out in the following article, near-death experiences, as far as scientific evidence itself goes, certainly have far more going for them than Darwinian evolution does. And to further drive Dr. Egnor's point home, in the following study, materialistic researchers who had a bias against near-death experiences being real set out to prove that they were merely false memories or hallucinations by setting up a clever questionnaire that could differentiate which memories a person had were real and which memories a person had were merely imaginary. Simply put, they did not expect the results that they got in their study. Much to their surprise, they found that, to quote the headline, the afterlife feels even more real than real. It is also very interesting to note that many of the characteristics found in near-death experience testimonies are exactly what we'd expect to see from what we now know about special relativity and general relativity. In the following video clip, Mickey Robinson gives his testimony of what it felt like for him to experience a timeless eternity.
Instantly, there was no sense of time. See, everything on earth is related to time. You got up this morning, you're going to go to bed at night. Something is new, it'll get old. Something is born, it's going to die. Everything on the physical plane is relative to time. But everything in the spiritual plane is relative to eternity. Instantly, I was in total consciousness and awareness of eternity. And you and I, as we live on this earth, cannot even comprehend it. Because everything that we have here is still within this veil of the temporal life. But in the spirit life, that's more real than anything else. And it's awesome. Eternity as a concept is awesome. There was no such thing as time. I knew that whatever happens is going to go on forever and ever, wherever I was being shown. And I was traveling somewhere. I could feel myself traveling. And as I began to perceive and understand what I was doing, it became more intense. And I could see this at a distance, this white light that was growing. And as I began to travel towards that light, as if I was being drawn and carried, there was nothing I could do to change it.
And here are a few more quotes from people who have experienced near-death that speak of how their perception of time was radically altered as they were outside their material body. As well, near-death experiencers also frequently mention going through a tunnel to a higher heavenly dimension. In the following video, Barbara Springer gives her testimony as to what it felt like for her to go through the tunnel to heaven.
And then I noticed ahead of me a bright light. It wasn't above me. When I came out into the light, it turned out it was way above. But as I looked at it, it just looked ahead of me. So I started to move toward the light. And the way I moved, the physics was completely different than it is here on Earth. It was completely something I'd never felt before and have never felt since. It was a whole different sensation of motion. I obviously wasn't walking or skipping or crawling or any of those things. I was not floating. I was flowing. I was flowing toward the light. I was accelerating, and yet I knew I was accelerating, but then again, I didn't really feel the acceleration. I just knew that I was accelerating toward the light. It was there again, the physics was different. The physics of motion, time, space, travel, it was completely different in that tunnel than it is here on Earth. I came out into the light, and when I came out into the light, I realized that I was in heaven. To me, it was heaven. It was this wonderfully welcoming, bright light. It was a brighter light than any light here on Earth. There's nothing here that's that bright. But it didn't hurt my eyes. And
in the following audio clip, Vicki Noratuck, who has been blind since birth, besides being able to see for the first time in her life during her near-death experience, also gives testimony of going through a tunnel.
And then this vehicle formed itself around me. And vehicle is the only thing, or tube or something, I don't know quite, but it was a mode of transportation, that's for sure. And it formed around me. And then there was no one in it with me. I was alone. But I knew there were other people ahead of me and behind me. And what they were doing, I don't know, but there were people ahead of me and people behind me, but I was alone in my particular conveyance. And I could see out of it. And it went at a tremendously, horrifically rapid rate of speed. But it wasn't unpleasant. It was beautiful, in fact. I was reclining in this thing. I wasn't sitting straight up, but I wasn't lying down in it either. I was sitting back. And it was just so fast.
And in the following quotes, Mary Neal and John Burke both testify that they firmly believe that they were in a higher dimension that is above this three-dimensional world, and that the reason that they have a very difficult time explaining what their near-death experience felt like for them is because we simply don't have the words to properly describe that higher dimension. Moreover, besides heavenly experiences, there are also hellish experiences that also corroborate what we would expect to see from what we now know about general relativity. In the following video clip, former atheist Howard Storm speaks of what eternity felt like for him in that hellish dimension.
Push them away by talking about God. And so I'm trying to remember prayers, and I'm getting all confused and mixed up, and it was just all crazy, and I'm lying there, and eventually I realize that they're gone, and I'm alone. Now, I was alone there for an eternity, and what I mean by that was absolutely no sense of time. But I thought about my life, thought about what I'd done and what I hadn't done. I thought about the situation I was in, and the conclusion that I came to is that I had lived my adult life. I had lived a selfish life. My only God in my adult life was myself.
And at the 7-minute mark of this video, Ron Reagan gives testimony of falling down a tunnel towards hell.
Pulled out of the parking lot of that hospital, a young paramedic looked down into my face, and I could barely see him. I was so weak. But he said, "Sir, you need Jesus Christ." And I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know what he was talking about. So my reaction to that was to begin cursing. And again, he stated to me, "You need Jesus." And as he was talking to me, it appeared like the ambulance literally exploded in flames. I thought it had actually blown up. It filled with smoke, And immediately I was moving through that smoke as if through a tunnel. And after some period of time coming out of the smoke and out of the darkness, I began to hear the voices of a multitude of people screaming and groaning and crying. But as I looked down, the sensation was looking down upon a volcanic opening and seeing fire and smoke and people inside of this burning place screaming and crying. They were burning, but they weren't burning up. They weren't being consumed. And then the sensation of moving downward.
As well, in this following video, Bill Weiss also gives testimony of tumbling down a tunnel in his transition stage to hell.
I'm going to take you to that date, November 23rd, 1998, and you go to bed, you get up at what time, 3 in the morning?
I got up at 3 o'clock just to get a glass of water.
How did you know it was 3?
I looked at the clock.
Okay, you get the glass of water. What happened to you?
Suddenly, Sid, I found myself, I was being pulled out of my body. Like this was an out-of-body experience, and I've never had one before. But I was pulled out of my body, and I found myself falling through the air and tumbling down this long tunnel. And I entered into this open cavern area, and I hit this stone floor, and I found myself in a prison cell with rough-hewn stone walls and bars. I was actually in a prison, but it looked like a dungeon, filthy, stinking, smoke-filled prison.
Did you realize where you were?
I was fully awake and cognizant. I was not dreaming.
No, I understand, but did you know you were in hell?
Yes. The heat was far beyond the ability to sustain life, so I knew immediately.
And in the following video, Pastor Paul Ojeda also speaks of falling towards hell at a very fast rate of speed.
Immediately, as they were lifting me up, putting me in the ambulance, and my wife was getting in, and we were headed to the hospital, I flatlined. They lost me. And so as I died, immediately I wake up, and I'm in this totally different place. It felt like somebody grabbed me and dropped me in this outer darkness, and I start racing down this bottomless pit. As I'm racing down this pit, which seems like forever, it's the blackest, darkest. And as I'm racing down there, it's then when I realize, hey, I'm going to hell. But I said, well, there's something wrong. I mean, I shouldn't be going to hell. I'm not a bad person. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't do anything really that bad. And it seemed like as I began to justify myself, this thing went faster and faster with every time I tried to justify my actions and who I was. It's at that point I thought, you know, I really got scared because I realized that I was going to hell. I had no control of this, and I didn't want to go to hell. I cried out to the Lord and said, God, I really need you at this point. And then all of a sudden, I feel the Spirit of the Lord come next to me. I didn't see a face or anything. I just felt His presence. And in the darkest hour when God showed up, there was this peace. It felt like all of a sudden everything stopped and stand still.
Like you stop, drop.
Thus, in conclusion, Christians, far from being anti-science, as atheists often accuse Christians of being, Christians can appeal directly to quantum mechanics, special relativity, and general relativity, some of our most powerful theories in science today, to powerfully back up some of their core beliefs about God and about the afterlife. Well, that is the end of the video. Thanks very much for watching. And again, I remind viewers that all papers and videos referenced in this video may be accessed in the link provided in the video description. Thanks again for watching.